The text came at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, 3 days before I was supposed to walk down the aisle. I remember the exact time because I was sitting on the bathroom floor with a cup of chamomile tea, trying to convince myself I wasn't having a panic attack about seating charts. My phone lit up on the tile beside me. It was a coworker, someone I hadn't talked to in months, just a casual hi-and-bye kind of friend from my old marketing job. She wrote, "Hey, I don't want to be weird, but is your mom in Cabo right now? I just saw your stepdad's wife post a story from the resort and your mom is in it." I read it twice, then a third time. My hands started shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone in the toilet. I told her to send me the screenshot. She did. It was my mother in a turquoise sundress I'd never seen before, holding a margarita the size of a small fishbowl. Behind her was an infinity pool that bled into the ocean. The caption read, "Family time is the best time." There were 5 sun emojis. There was a heart. There was a tag for a 5-star resort I had never heard of. And underneath, the geotag said, "Los Cabos, Mexico." My wedding was in 72 hours. In Charleston, South Carolina, where I had paid for every single member of my family to fly in. Let me back up for a second so this makes sense. My name is Marlo. I'm 31 years old and I work as a senior project manager at a healthcare consulting firm in Raleigh. I've been with my fiancé, Wesley, for almost 5 years. He's a high school history teacher, the kind of man who reads to his nieces over FaceTime and remembers everyone's coffee order. We were getting married at a restored chapel near the harbor, and the reception was going to be at a small event space that overlooked the water. I'd been saving for the wedding since the day he proposed, 18 months earlier. The thing is, my family is scattered. My older brother lives in Phoenix with his wife and 3 kids. My mother and stepfather live in Boise. My aunt, who basically raised me alongside my grandmother, lives in a tiny town in upstate New York. Getting all of them to Charleston in late spring was going to cost a fortune. I knew that going in, so I did what I thought was the right thing. I sat down with a spreadsheet about 10 months before the wedding and figured out exactly what it would cost to get everyone to Charleston, put them in a decent hotel for 3 nights, and cover their meals. The total came to just over $22,000. Flights from Boise alone for my mom and stepdad were almost $3,000 round trip because of the timing. My brother's family of 5 was nearly $6,000 by itself. The block of hotel rooms I reserved at a boutique inn near the chapel ate up another $8,000. Add in the rental cars, the welcome dinner I wanted to host, and a small contingency for taxis, and $22,000 was actually a conservative number. I had the money. I'd been freelancing on the side for years, taking on copywriting gigs and brand consulting projects on weekends. I'd been quietly stuffing every extra dollar into a separate savings account labeled, ridiculously, Wedding Family Travel. When I told Wesley what I was planning to do, he raised both eyebrows and asked if I was sure. I told him I was. I told him this was important to me. I told him my mother had cried when I got engaged, and I wanted her there, and if writing a check was what made it possible, then that was what I was going to do. Here's the part where I have to be honest about something. My mother and I have what therapists like to call a complicated relationship. She remarried when I was 14, after my dad died of a heart attack at 42, and her second husband was a man named who I'll just call my stepfather, because giving him a name would dignify him in a way I don't want to. He had a daughter from his previous marriage who was 3 years younger than me, and from the moment we all moved in together, it was very clear who the favorite was. My stepsister got the bigger bedroom. My stepsister got the new car at 16. My stepsister got the college fund. I worked 2 jobs through high school and took out loans for college, and my mother told me it built character. My grandmother, my dad's mother, was the one who held me together during all of that. She lived 4 hours away in upstate New York, and every summer I'd take the bus up to spend 2 weeks with her. She made me feel like I mattered. She told me my father would be proud. She paid for my SAT prep when my mother said it was a waste of money. She drove down for my college graduation when no one else came because there was a quote-unquote scheduling conflict with my stepsister's volleyball tournament. My grandmother died 14 months before my wedding. I gave the eulogy. My mother didn't cry. My stepsister didn't come. So when I sent the money to my mother in 3 separate transfers because the bank flagged the first one for fraud, I knew there was a chance things would go sideways. I knew. But I also knew that if I didn't try, if I didn't reach out, I would always wonder whether things could have been different. I wanted my wedding day to be a reset. I wanted to look out at those white chairs and see my family sitting in them and feel, for one afternoon, like I belonged to someone. I sent the money in February. The wedding was in May. I sent her the hotel reservations, the flight confirmations I pre-booked under everyone's names, the rental car codes, the welcome dinner reservation, the schedule. Everything was set. I called her every couple of weeks to confirm details. She seemed engaged. She asked about flowers. She asked about my dress. She said she was excited. Looking back, she was a little too smooth about it. She never pushed back on any logistics. She never asked clarifying questions. She just said, "Sounds good, honey," and changed the subject. The night the screenshot arrived, I sat on the bathroom floor for what must have been 20 minutes before I could move. Then I called her. She didn't pick up. I called again. Voicemail. I texted, "Mom, please call me, right now." 3 minutes later, my phone rang. Her voice was bright, too bright. There was music in the background and the sound of glasses clinking. "Honey, hi, I was just about to call you. The service down here is so spotty." I asked her where she was. There was a long pause, long enough that I knew. I had already known, but the pause confirmed it. She finally said, "Sweetheart, listen, I was going to tell you, things just got complicated." I asked her again, slowly, where she was. She said Cabo. I asked her who was with her. She said my stepfather, my stepsister, my stepsister husband, and their 2-year-old. I asked her about the money. She got defensive immediately. She said my stepsister had been having a really hard year, that the baby had colic, that her marriage was strained, and that they all needed a real vacation. She said it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity because there was a deal on the resort. She said my brother and his family weren't coming anyway because his oldest had soccer regionals, so what was the point of flying just her and my stepdad out for the weekend? I said, "Mom, you canceled the flights I booked." She said, "Well, technically the airline let us transfer the credits. We just used them for a different trip." I said, "You used the wedding money for a vacation." She said, "Honey, I really think you're overreacting. You have so many friends. You'll have a beautiful day." I hung up. I stood in the bathroom for another long minute. Then I walked out into the bedroom where Wesley was reading. He took one look at my face and put the book down. I told him all of it. The Cabo trip, the transferred flights, my brother not coming, the whole thing. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he stood up and pulled me into a hug, and I cried into his shoulder until his t-shirt was soaked through. The next morning, I called my brother. He was at work, and he was confused at first when I asked him what was going on. He said, "Marlo, I told Mom 3 weeks ago that we couldn't make it. The kids' tournament conflict. I figured she told you." She had not told me. I asked him if Mom had offered him any of the money I sent for his family's flights. He said no. He said he had asked her about it actually, jokingly, and she had said the wedding budget was tight and it would be better if he just sent me a nice gift instead. He asked me very quietly if I was okay. I told him I didn't know. He said he was sorry. He said he should have called me himself when he canceled. He said he just assumed Mom was handling it. That afternoon, I called my aunt. She picked up on the second ring. I asked her if she was still planning to come to the wedding. There was a pause, and then she said, "Sweetheart, your mother told me last month that you'd had to scale things down and weren't flying people in anymore. She said you'd let me know if anything changed." I sat down on the kitchen floor. I had bought my aunt a plane ticket back in February. I had emailed her the confirmation. I had sent her the hotel reservation. I had called her in March to ask what kind of flowers she wanted in her hotel room. None of these things had registered as suspicious to me at the time, because my aunt is 73 years old and not great with email, and she just kept saying, "Whatever you want, honey, I'm just so happy for you." My mother had told her not to come. My mother had specifically reached out to my aunt and lied to her face to keep her from showing up at my wedding. Why? Because if my aunt came, my aunt would have asked where everyone else was. My aunt would have figured it out. My aunt would have figured it out. My aunt would have made a scene, so my mother cut her out preemptively. She isolated me on what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life so that the only person sitting in those reserved family seats would be no one at all. I called my aunt back 20 minutes later, after I had stopped crying enough to talk. I told her the truth. I told her everything. She was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "Marlo, honey, I'm getting on a plane tomorrow. I don't care what it costs. I will see you at the chapel." She booked a flight that night. She paid for it herself. The day of the wedding was the strangest day of my life. The morning was beautiful. Charleston in May is something out of a postcard. The light comes through the live oaks all gold and dappled, and the whole city smells like jasmine. I had my hair done at the inn where I was staying. My two best friends, who had flown in from Denver and Chicago at their own expense, sat with me while the makeup artist did her work. They held my hands. They told me funny stories about college. They didn't bring up my mother once, unless I brought her up first. I had sent my mother a single text that morning at 9 a.m. It said, "Don't contact me, don't post about the wedding, don't pretend to anyone that you were here." She read it. She didn't reply. When I walked into the chapel, I almost didn't make it down the aisle. The pews on Wesley's side were packed. His mother was beaming. His father was already crying. His 3 sisters and their husbands and all his nieces and nephews were lined up like a Norman Rockwell painting. On my side, there were 2 rows of friends I had collected over the years, college roommates, work friends, neighbors. And in the very front, in the seat reserved for the mother of the bride, sat my aunt. She was wearing a soft blue dress with a white sweater because she was always cold. She had a fresh white lily pinned to her chest. When she saw me at the back of the chapel, she stood up and put both her hands over her mouth and just nodded at me, over and over, like she was telling me, "You can do this. I'm here. I've got you." Wesley's father walked me down the aisle. He had asked me 3 weeks before the wedding if I would let him do that, regardless of what happened with my own family, because he said no daughter of his was walking alone. I had cried then too. I won't get into the ceremony itself. It was beautiful. It was ours. The reception was loud and warm and full of people who actually wanted to be there, and at one point my aunt stood up without anyone asking and gave a toast about my grandmother, about how proud she would have been, about how love isn't always inherited, but it's always chosen. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. My mother posted on Facebook that night a photo of her on the beach in Cabo, sunset behind her holding a margarita. The caption read, "So blessed to spend this special week with my real family." Real, in italics. She had unblocked me on Facebook that morning specifically so I would see it. I didn't respond. I didn't post anything from the wedding for 2 weeks. I let her have her little narrative for a while because I had bigger things to deal with. 3 weeks after the wedding, I got a letter in the mail. It was from a law firm in upstate New York that I had never heard of. The envelope was thick and the return address was embossed in gold. I opened it at the kitchen counter while Wesley made dinner. The letter said it was regarding the estate of my grandmother. I was confused at first because her estate had been settled over a year ago, or so I thought. The letter said there was a secondary trust that had been held in escrow pending a specific date, and that date had now arrived. It instructed me to call the firm to schedule a meeting. I called the next morning. The lawyer who picked up was a woman about my mother's age with a no-nonsense voice. She told me my grandmother had set up a trust 7 years before she died, separate from her main will. The trust held assets that had not been disclosed during the standard probate process because they had been intentionally held back. The trust had a single beneficiary, me. The total value after taxes and the firm's fees was just over $680,000. I had to ask her to repeat the number. I made her say it 3 times. She said my grandmother had specifically structured it this way because she didn't trust my mother. She said there was a letter included with the trust documents that I would receive in the mail, written by my grandmother herself, and that I should read it before I made any decisions about what to do next. The letter arrived 2 days later. I opened it on the back porch. It was 4 pages long, written by hand in my grandmother's careful schoolteacher script. She said she had known for years that my mother and stepfather were going to come for any inheritance she left behind. She said she had watched them treat me like an afterthought my entire life and had hated herself for not doing more sooner. She said the money she had left in her standard will, the house and the small savings account that had been split between my mother and my brother and me, was a decoy. She knew my mother would be satisfied with that, the real money, the money my grandfather had left her when he died, and that she had quietly invested for 30 years, had been put into a trust with my name on it and a clause that said it could not be released until 18 months after her death. 18 months, she wrote, was enough time for her to be sure my mother had moved on and stopped looking. She wrote, "Marlo, I am leaving this to you because you are the only person in this family who has ever understood that money is not love. Use it however you want. Buy a house, travel, start a business. But know that I am giving you this because you have always given more than you got. And I want you to finally be on the receiving end of something, just once." The last line of the letter said, "Don't tell your mother. She will try to take it. She will try to make you feel guilty. You owe her nothing. You owe yourself everything." I sat on the porch and cried until the sun went down. Wesley and I talked about it for a long time that week. We weren't hurting for money. He was tenured. I had a good job. We had been planning to buy a house in another year or two anyway. We didn't need $680,000 to fall out of the sky. What I kept coming back to was my grandmother. She had been a public school teacher for 41 years. She had taught 5th grade in a town where most of her students lived below the poverty line. Every Christmas, she had bought coats and boots for the kids in her class who didn't have them, paid for out of her own pocket. She had sponsored a scholarship at her old high school for years. She believed in second chances, and she believed in education, and she believed that the right teacher at the right moment could change a kid's life. I told Wesley I wanted to take half of it, $340,000, and start a scholarship fund in her name. The other half I wanted to put toward a down payment on a house and a college fund for the kids we'd eventually have. He said yes before I finished explaining. He held my hand across the table and said, "Your grandma would have loved you for this." I started the paperwork the next week. I named a fund after my grandmother. I worked with a foundation that specialized in setting up educational scholarships, and we built a program that would award 4 scholarships a year to first-generation college students in upstate New York, the area where my grandmother had taught, $2,000 each per semester, renewable for 4 years. The math worked out so that the fund could run in perpetuity if we managed it right. I didn't tell my mother any of this. I didn't tell anyone in my family except my brother, who cried on the phone when I read him my grandmother's letter. A month after the trust was finalized, my mother called me. I had blocked her number, so it went to a voicemail box I rarely checked. I listened to it that night. Her voice was different. It was small. It was the voice she used to use when she wanted something from my dad before he died. She said the lawyer had finally told her about the trust. She said she had been hurt to learn that I had received a substantial inheritance and hadn't told her. She said it was only fair that the family share in what Grandma had left, since Grandma would have wanted that. She said she and my stepfather were behind on their mortgage. She said my stepsister was thinking about leaving her husband and needed help with childcare. She said, "Please call her." I deleted the voicemail. 2 weeks later, she posted on Facebook a long, weepy post about how her own daughter had stolen her mother's inheritance and refused to share with the family who raised her. She mentioned that she'd given me everything growing up. She mentioned that she had even offered to come to my wedding, but I had been too busy for her. She mentioned that she was suffering financial hardship while her daughter lived in luxury off the back of a dead woman. The post went semi-viral in her small Boise community. People I hadn't talked to in 15 years started messaging me. Some of them were angry. Some of them were curious. Some of them were old friends of my mother who I had genuinely liked as a kid and who now thought I was a monster. I didn't respond for 3 days. I let it sit. I called Wesley's mother and asked her what to do. She is the wisest woman I know. She said, "Honey, you have the truth on your side. Tell it once, tell it well, and then never speak of it again." I sat down that weekend and wrote a Facebook post of my own. It was the longest thing I had written in years. I included screenshots. I included receipts. I included the email confirmations of the flights I had booked for my family. I included the screenshot from the coworker showing my mother on the beach in Cabo 3 days before my wedding. I included the dates my mother had withdrawn the money I sent her and the dates the resort had been booked. I included a copy of my grandmother's handwritten letter with personal information redacted, but with the line about my mother trying to take the money clearly visible. I did not include any insults. I did not call my mother names. I did not editorialize. I just laid out the facts in chronological order and let people draw their own conclusions. At the bottom, I included a link to the scholarship fund I had set up in my grandmother's name. I wrote, "Half of the inheritance my grandmother left me is going here, to honor her work as a teacher. The other half is helping my husband and I build a life. None of it is going to people who taught me my whole life that I was an inconvenience. If you want to honor my grandmother's memory, donate to the fund. If you want to side with my mother, please unfriend me. I won't hold it against you." The post went up at noon on a Saturday. By Monday morning, it had over 2,000 shares. People I'd never met had donated to the scholarship fund. The foundation called me at my office to ask if I knew why their server was getting so much traffic. My mother deleted her original post by Tuesday. Then she deleted her Facebook account. Then she texted me from a number I didn't recognize, asking if I would please take down my post because she was getting harassed in her community. I didn't respond. My stepsister sent me a long email 3 weeks later trying to play peacemaker. She said our mother was having a really hard time and needed her family. She said I was being selfish and cruel. She said the Cabo trip had been her idea and she felt terrible about it, but I needed to forgive everyone and move on. She said Grandma wouldn't have wanted me to hold a grudge. I wrote back one line. Don't email me again. She did email me again, twice more, both times angrier than the last. The second one threatened legal action over the inheritance. I forwarded both emails to the lawyer who had handled my grandmother's trust. She wrote me back saying not to worry, that the trust was airtight, and that if my stepsister or my mother attempted to contest it, they would lose and would owe legal fees on top of it. She said she would handle any further communication on my behalf. That was a year ago. I'm writing this from the back porch of the house Wesley and I bought 8 months ago. It's a small craftsman in a quiet neighborhood about 15 minutes from his school. There's a maple tree in the front yard that turns the most absurd shade of red in October. We're expecting our first baby in March, a daughter. We're going to name her after my grandmother. The scholarship fund has awarded its first round of recipients. 4 young women, all first-generation college students, all from the kind of small towns where the future feels narrow. I read each of their applications myself. One of them wrote in her essay that her own grandmother had been her champion growing up, and reading it, I had to stop and put my head down on my desk for a few minutes. I have not spoken to my mother in 14 months. I filed for and received a no-contact order against her and my stepfather 6 months ago after a series of escalating phone calls from blocked numbers and one incident where my stepsister showed up at my office in Raleigh asking to speak with me. The security guard handled it. I never saw her face. My brother and I talk every week now. He flies out a few times a year with his kids, and we've gotten close in a way we never were growing up. He told me last Christmas that he had cut contact with our mother too after she made a comment about his oldest daughter being as ungrateful as Marlo. He said it was the easiest decision he ever made. My aunt is still my aunt. She's the only family I've kept from that side. She's coming to stay with us for a month after the baby is born. She's already knitting a blanket. She sends me photos of her progress every few days. The yarn is the same shade of soft blue as the dress she wore to my wedding. I think about my grandmother every single day. I think about the trust she set up, the letters she wrote, the way she saw what was coming years before I did and quietly built a fortress around me without ever telling me. I think about how she taught 5th grade for 41 years and changed lives she'll never know about. I think about how the first scholarship recipient sent me a handwritten thank you note on lined notebook paper, like a kid in a 5th grade classroom, and how I cried in the kitchen reading it. I learned a lot of things from this whole experience, but the biggest one is this. Family isn't who shares your blood. Family is who shows up. Family is who books a last-minute plane ticket at 73 years old to make sure you're not alone at the altar. Family is who walks you down an aisle when no one else will. Family is who builds a fund 7 years before they die because they love you that much. Family is who sits next to you on the back porch and rubs your belly and tells you the baby is going to be loud, just like her mother. The people who used my wedding money for a vacation in Cabo are not my family. They are people I happen to share DNA with. There is a difference, and once you learn it, you can't unlearn it. I hope that wherever my grandmother is, she knows. I hope she's proud. I hope she sees the 4 scholarship girls and the maple tree and the blue blanket and the baby coming in March. I hope she knows that her last gift to me wasn't the money. It was the permission to let go of the people who never deserved me and to build something better with the people who always did. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this happened, about how every choice my mother made over 31 years built the wall that eventually fell on her. She didn't lose me in one phone call from Cabo. She lost me a little at a time. Every birthday she forgot, every report card she didn't read, every time she chose my stepsister's comfort over my dignity. The vacation was just the moment the bill came due. People love to act surprised when their relationships collapse. But the truth is, collapses are almost always slow. We just don't notice the cracks until the ceiling is on the floor. What I learned and what I want my daughter to learn one day is that decency is not a transaction. You don't behave well so other people will reward you. You behave well because it's who you are, and because the version of yourself you have to live with at the end of the day is the only version you can't escape. My mother thought she could lie to my aunt, take my money, post on Facebook, and still keep the parts of me she found useful. She didn't understand that character compounds. Every small dishonesty added up until the math finally caught her. The other thing I learned is that intelligence isn't about being clever. It's about being able to look at a situation and see it for what it actually is, even when you desperately want it to be something else. I knew in some deep part of myself what my mother was for years before that night on the bathroom floor. I just didn't want to know it. I think a lot of us live like that. We trade clarity for comfort because clarity demands action, and action is hard. The smartest thing I ever did was finally let myself see her clearly and then act on what I saw. And then there's the strength piece, which I think people misunderstand the most. Strength isn't the loud part. It isn't the speeches or the comebacks or the dramatic exits. Strength is the quiet decision made over and over again to keep choosing yourself. It was my aunt at 73 booking that flight without being asked. It was my grandmother sitting in a lawyer's office 7 years before she died, building a fortress around a granddaughter who didn't even know she needed one. It was Wesley's father offering to walk me down the aisle 3 weeks before the wedding, just in case. None of those things were loud. All of them were strong. If you're reading this and you have a mother like mine, or a sister like mine, or a family that has spent your whole life teaching you that you don't matter, I want you to know something. You are allowed to leave. You are allowed to keep your inheritance. You are allowed to build a different family out of the people who actually show up. And the day you stop apologizing for protecting yourself is the day your real life finally starts.